Welcome to a Dual Digest podcast where two friends dive deep into the topics that matter.
From technology and AI to science, history, and global trends, we break down complex ideas and make them easy to understand.
Whether you're here for insights, entertainment, or just some good conversation, we've got you covered.
Just remember, stay curious, question everything, and keep exploring the world around you. And remember, every great conversation starts with a curious mind. Let's explore together.
Make sure to follow and subscribe.
Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into something I think we all struggle with sometimes, self-sabotage. Those times when we're, kind of our own worst enemies.
Oh, yeah.
And to guide us, we have Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You. And let me tell you, it is really making me think.
It's such a good book. It gets to the core of why we sometimes act in ways that just don't seem to make sense, like against our own best interests.
Right.
And Wiest's idea is that self-sabotage, it's not about hating yourself. It's more about, these unconscious needs and negative associations that we've kind of picked up along the way.
That's what I find so interesting about it. It's not just about, willpower or making the right choices. There's this whole deeper level of psychology going on.
Yeah.
And, the fact that everyone, like psychologists and life coaches and just regular people are recommending this book just shows you how universal this whole experience really is.
Oh, yeah.
What really struck you about this whole idea?
Well, one thing that really got me thinking is how Wiest connects self-sabotage to get this legitimate suffering.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She uses Carl Jung's childhood as an example. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist.
Yes.
He actually pretended to faint to get out of school.
Really?
He really disliked school. And he later realized this was like his unconscious mind trying to protect him from something uncomfortable.
So it's like our minds are creating these elaborate workarounds, even if they end up backfiring on us in the long run?
Exactly. And this ties into that whole shadow self thing, the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. Self-sabotage often comes from a conflict between what we consciously want and these hidden needs we have.
Okay, I'm following you. But help me get this straight. How do these unconscious needs actually lead to self-sabotage? Can you give me an example that would really resonate with our listeners?
Okay, let's say you really want a committed, loving relationship. Consciously you want that. But deep down, maybe from past experiences, you have this belief you're not worthy of love. And so you might unconsciously sabotage relationships, maybe by choosing partners who are emotionally unavailable or pushing away people who get too close.
Wow, that is so insightful. And it's not even a choice we're making on purpose, right? It's like these patterns are running the show without us even realizing it. So how do we even start to untangle all of these beliefs and behaviors?
Well, Wiest gets into how our self-concept, the image we have of ourselves, is shaped by our early experiences. She talks about money as an example. You might really want financial stability, but if you grow up hearing rich people are bad, your subconscious might actually resist success with money.
It's like our past experiences are creating this blueprint, for how we see ourselves in the world.
Exactly.
But if that blueprint is messed up, how can we change it? Can we actually rewrite those deep-seated patterns?
Well, Wiest suggests we can, but it takes real deep self-work. She talked about these subconscious commitments, which are like the hidden reasons behind why we self-sabotage.
Right.
And that really makes sense to me. We have to understand what's keeping us stuck, what we're getting out of it.
That's a really powerful question to ask ourselves, I think we often focus on what we're not getting, but figuring out the perks of staying stuck, even if they're not good for us, can be a huge eye-opener.
Absolutely. And once we figure out those subconscious commitments, we can start to tackle those negative associations and build new, healthy beliefs. It's not going to be easy, but it's definitely possible.
Before we jump into solutions, there's this other really interesting thing Wiest talks about that I want to explore. This idea of an upper limit for happiness.
Oh, yeah?
Can you break that down for us?
It's based on Gay Hendricks' work. And basically it says we all have a comfort zone for positive feelings. When we go beyond that limit, even with good things happening, we tend to self-sabotage to get back to that familiar level.
Wait, so you mean even good things can trigger self-sabotage? That's kind of mind-blowing. Why would we mess up our own happiness?
It goes back to that whole being wired for comfort and familiarity thing. Our brains prioritize feeling safe, even if it means staying in a not-so-great situation.
They're like, We might sabotage a promotion because it feels too scary, or end a relationship that's not working because it's what we're used to, even if it's painful. It's like choosing the devil we know over something unknown, even if the unknown might be way better.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to remember self-sabotage, it's not like a flaw in your character. It's a survival mechanism that's trying to protect you even if it ends up holding you back. And this brings us to all the different ways self-sabotage can show up, which Wiest goes into a lot of detail about.
Let's dive into those. I bet our listeners are going to recognize themselves in some of these examples. Where should we start?
Oh, Wiest covers a ton of behaviors, from perfectionism to procrastination to just trying to please everyone all the time. And what's helpful is she connects each of these to what might be the underlying need.
Okay, give us an example. Let's say someone struggles with perfectionism. How is that self-sabotage, and what might be the deeper need behind it?
Perfectionism could be a way of avoiding criticism or judgment.
Oh, yeah.
You might be so afraid of making a mistake that you never even start a project, or you spend hours making something that's already good enough even better. It's like putting on this perfect image ahead of actually getting things done.
That is so relatable. I think we've all felt that fear of not being good enough.
Oh, for sure.
And it's not about laziness or not being motivated. It's about this deeper fear driving the whole thing.
Exactly. And why it suggests perfectionism is often hiding a fear of being vulnerable. It's safer to stay in the planning stage than to actually put yourself out there and risk being judged.
So instead of being hard on ourselves for being perfectionists, we need to understand it's like a coping mechanism, a way of protecting ourselves from feeling hurt. And that's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. And once we get that, we can start to deal with that underlying fear and find healthier ways to cope. Maybe it's practicing self-compassion or learning to be okay with constructive criticism.
So it's not about becoming less perfect. It's about understanding where that perfectionism comes from and finding ways to move forward in a way that feels safe and genuine.
Exactly. And that's a theme that runs through Wiest's whole book. It's about understanding the why behind our self-sabotage, not just focusing on the what.
Okay, we talked about perfectionism. What other common self-sabotaging things does Wiest explore, and how can we start to see these patterns in our own lives?
Well, another big one is justification, which is basically just making excuses to avoid taking action. It might sound like I'll start tomorrow or I'm too busy right now, but it's really about choosing comfort over going after what you want.
Oh, the I'll start tomorrow trap. We've all been there. But how do we know if it's just procrastination or something deeper?
Wiest suggests looking for patterns. If you're always making excuses for why you can't go after your goals or make changes, it might be a sign that there's some fear or resistance holding you back.
So it's not about judging ourselves for procrastinating. It's about being curious about what's really going on underneath.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness becomes so important. Paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and noticing when we're slipping into those self-sabotaging patterns.
What about downplaying our successes? That seems like a sneaky kind of self-sabotage.
Right.
Why would we downplay our own achievements?
It could be because of a fear of judgment, a fear of standing out, or even a fear of peaking too soon. It's like we're trying to make ourselves smaller to avoid attention.
And I think that connects to societal expectations, especially for women. There's this pressure to be humble, to not be too much.
Yeah.
So even when we do great things, we might downplay them so we don't make others uncomfortable.
That's a great point, and it shows how societal stuff can feed into self-sabotage. But Wiest encourages us to own our accomplishments, be proud and grateful. It's about recognizing our hard work and celebrating our wins without minimizing them.
So it's about giving ourselves permission to shine, to really own our achievements without apologizing for them. That's powerful. What else does Wiest cover in terms of these common self-sabotaging behaviors?
Well, she also talks about pride, and this might sound a little strange at first.
Right, because we usually think of pride as a good thing. But how can it be self-sabotage?
It's not about healthy self-confidence, but more about needing validation too much. This can make us afraid of being vulnerable and showing our imperfections.
So it's like building this facade of perfection to protect our ego, but then we're blocking real connection and growth.
Exactly. And the way to deal with this, according to Wiest, is to embrace those imperfections and be authentic. It's about earning respect by being real, not trying to be perfect.
It's like letting go of the need to be right all the time and just allowing ourselves to be human. That's a big shift.
It is. And another interesting type of self-sabotage she talks about is guilt, especially guilt around success. It might sound weird, but some people feel guilty when they achieve things.
That does seem counterintuitive, but I can see how it could happen. Maybe it's connected to negative ideas about wealth, like feeling unworthy or like you don't deserve it.
And it's fascinating how Wiest reframes success. She wants us to see it as a way to make a positive impact. your success doesn't just benefit you, it can benefit others too.
It's like shifting from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset.
Exactly.
Your achievements can create this ripple effect of good stuff.
Exactly. And that leads to another common fear that can cause self-sabotage, the fear of failure. It can stop us from trying new things or make us anxious about losing what we've already achieved.
Oh, the fear of failure, that's a big one for me. It's like that feeling of what if everything goes wrong, and it can keep us stuck, afraid to take any risks. But Wiest has some interesting thoughts on this, right?
She does. She makes this really important distinction between failing because you didn't try hard enough versus taking calculated risks.
Right.
You're going to fail sometimes on the way to growth. It's about learning from our mistakes and using them to move forward.
It's about seeing failure as part of the journey, not the end of the road.
Exactly. And that brings us to another form of self-sabotage that people don't talk about enough: neglecting your health. It's easy to put our physical well-being on the back burner, whether it's bad eating habits, not exercising, or not getting enough sleep.
It's like running on empty and ignoring our own needs. But what's interesting is that Wiest doesn't give us a one-size-fits-all approach to health.
Right, she wisely points out that we need to define what health means for us.
Yeah.
It's not about fitting into a specific mold, but about finding what works for our individual needs and lifestyles.
It's about making self-care a priority, not just something we squeeze in if we have time.
And that leads to another thing. She talks about busyness. It's almost like a badge of honor in today's world. But being super busy can distract us from deeper issues. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're using being busy as a way to avoid dealing with our feelings or the things that really matter. I've definitely been guilty of that.
Wise says to prioritize tasks, streamline our schedules, and find healthier ways to deal with discomfort instead of just diving into chaos.
It's about creating a more intentional and balanced life, not just filling every minute with something to do.
Right.
And finally, she talks about the impact of toxic relationships.
We've all known those people who drain our energy, make us feel bad about ourselves, or just bring negativity into our lives. It's like we're slowly poisoning ourselves by staying in those situations.
And sometimes we don't even realize how much they're affecting us until we get some distance.
Wise encourages us to build relationships that are supportive, inspiring, and give us energy. It's about surrounding ourselves with people who lift us up, not drag us down.
It's about quality over quantity when it comes to relationships.
So we've covered a lot, and it's clear that self-sabotage can show up in so many ways.
And it's not about beating ourselves up for these behaviors, but about understanding what needs they're trying to fulfill.
Exactly.
But how do we actually figure out those unconscious commitments driving our self-sabotage?
That's a great question, and it's what we're going to dive into next. Wise gives us a roadmap for uncovering those subconscious patterns and starting to change our stories.
So we've explored all these different ways self-sabotage can show up in our lives. But how do we actually start to identify those deeper unconscious passions that are driving these behaviors? It feels like we need some serious detective work here.
Wise provides some great tool for that detective work. She offers a series of insightful questions to guide us in this process of self-reflection.
I love that she makes it practical. It's not just theory, it's about applying these concepts to our own lives. So what are some of those questions that we can use to start digging deeper?
Well, she asks things like, what are the recurring patterns in your life? What are the common themes in your struggles? What do you go avoiding feeling? And what are you getting out of staying stuck?
Those are powerful questions. They really make you stop and think about the deeper motivations behind your actions. It's like holding up a mirror to your life and noticing those patterns that have been playing out, perhaps even unconsciously.
It's about becoming aware of those blind spots, those areas where we might be resisting growth or change.
And once we identify those patterns, what's the next step? Because recognizing them is one thing, but actually changing them feels like a whole other challenge.
Well, Wyeth then goes deeper, connecting specific self-sabotaging behaviors with potential unconscious needs. She provides some really fascinating examples that can help us make those connections in our own lives.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give us some examples. Because sometimes it's hard to see that connection on our own. We might know we're self-sabotaging, but we don't always understand why.
For instance, she suggests that repeatedly going back to the same person who hurt you in a relationship might indicate a need to recreate familiar dynamics, perhaps mirroring unresolved childhood issues. Have you ever seen that pattern play out with anyone you know?
Oh, absolutely. It's like they're drawn to the same type of person, even if it leads to heartache. And it's not about consciously seeking out pain, but rather about unconsciously seeking out what feels familiar, even if it's unhealthy.
Right. It's like we're trying to heal old wounds through these relationships, but we're actually just repeating the same patterns.
It's almost like those patterns become a comfort zone, even if they're not good for us.
Exactly. And another example Weist gives is attracting partners who are emotionally unavailable. This could point to a subconscious belief that you're not worthy of commitment, or that love always comes with pain.
It's fascinating how these patterns can play out in our relationships. It's like we're subconsciously recreating the patterns we learned early on, even if those patterns are no longer serving us.
And it's not just in our relationships. Wiest also talks about how self-sabotage can show up in our careers and our overall sense of well-being. For example, she addresses those who feel unhappy even when they've achieved outward success. This could be a sign that they're relying on external achievements for validation instead of cultivating inner peace and contentment.
That's so true. It's like that saying, happiness comes from within. We can't rely on external factors to fill that void.
Exactly. And it highlights how important it is to cultivate self-love and acceptance regardless of our accomplishments.
And what about people who push others away? I've known people who seem to sabotage friendships or romantic relationships by creating distance or conflict.
Wiest suggests that pushing people away could stem from a fear of vulnerability or a deep-seated need for control. It's not about not wanting connection, but rather about protecting themselves from potential hurt or rejection.
So it's like building walls to keep people out, but in the process, they're isolating themselves from genuine connection. It's a defense mechanism, but it can be so self-defeating in the long run.
It is, and it's important to remember that these behaviors are often unconscious. People aren't intentionally trying to sabotage themselves or their relationships. It's more about those deeper fears and insecurities that are driving their actions.
And what about those more everyday forms of self-sabotage, like overeating or procrastination? How can we understand those behaviors through this lens of subconscious commitments?
Well, with overeating, Weiss suggests it could be a sign of neglecting our needs, whether it's emotional nourishment or simply giving ourselves enough rest and self-care. It's like we're using food to numb ourselves or fill a voice that's not being met in other areas of our lives.
So it's not just about willpower or making better food choices. It's about addressing those deeper emotional needs.
Exactly. And with procrastination, she points out that putting off work that could move you forward might indicate a lack of clarity about your true passions or a fear of success.
It's like we're holding ourselves back because deep down we're not fully aligned with the path we're on. And that brings us to the question of how we start to change these patterns. Wyeth talks about developing emotional intelligence as a key part of this process, right?
She does. And she defines emotional intelligence as the ability to understand, interpret, and respond to our emotions effectively. It's like having a user manual for our own inner world.
And I think that's such a key point. It's not about suppressing our emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about learning to relate to them in a healthier way.
Exactly. And that involves releasing resistance and allowing ourselves to feel uncomfortable emotions. Because often, our self-sabotage stems from a fear of those difficult feelings. We try to avoid them, but that just keeps us stuck.
It's like those feelings are trying to get our attention, and when we push them away, they just get louder.
Wyeth offers some really helpful techniques for working with those difficult emotions. One that she suggests is writing a letter to your younger self, offering guidance and reassurance.
It's like offering a compassionate and understanding voice to the part of us that's still hurting or afraid.
She also suggests practicing mindfulness, observing our emotions without judgment. It's about creating space to simply feel those emotions without trying to change them or push them away.
It's about acknowledging that those feelings are valid even if they're uncomfortable.
Right. And she also encourages engaging in physical activities to release tension and process emotions. Because sometimes we need to move our bodies to help move those emotions through us. Have you ever noticed that? Like after a good workout or a run, you feel less stressed or anxious?
Oh, definitely. For me, exercise is such a great way to process my emotions. It's like I can literally sweat out the stress. But what about those times when we need to take action even when we don't feel like it? Because sometimes those uncomfortable feelings can lead to inertia or procrastination.
That's where Wyeth's advice about disconnecting action from feeling comes in. It's about recognizing that our feelings are designed for comfort and familiarity, and pushing ourselves beyond that comfort zone will initially feel challenging.
So it's not about waiting for motivation to strike or for the perfect feeling to arise, but rather about taking action even when we don't feel like it. It's like we're choosing to act in alignment with our goals, even if our feelings are telling us to stay put.
Exactly. And it's not about ignoring those feelings. It's about acknowledging them and choosing to act anyway.
It's like building a muscle. The more we practice taking action despite our discomfort, the stronger that muscle becomes. And that's where Wiest's concept of making microshifts comes in.
Yes, she offers this great advice about making tiny, consistent changes that gradually build momentum and create lasting transformation. It's not about those massive overnight transformations, but about those small, sustainable steps that we can take every day.
It's like building a house brick by brick. Each small action contributes to the overall structure.
Exactly. And she also acknowledges the profound impact of trauma on our self-sabotaging patterns. Trauma can keep us stuck in those patterns, affecting both our physical and emotional well-being.
It's like we're carrying those wounds with us, and they can manifest in so many different ways. So how does Weiss suggest we start to heal from trauma?
Well, she talks about trauma being stored in the body and the need to address it both physically and emotionally. It's not just about talking through it, but also about finding ways to release that trapped energy and restore a sense of safety.
So it's a holistic approach, recognizing that trauma affects us on multiple levels.
Exactly. She suggests various methods like restoring a sense of safety in areas where trauma occurred. It's about reclaiming those spaces and reestablishing a sense of agency and control.
That's a powerful concept, reclaiming those spaces that might feel unsafe or triggering.
She also mentions practicing meditation to observe and release trapped emotions. It's about creating a safe and non-judgmental space to process those feelings.
And meditation can be so helpful for cultivating that sense of inner peace and stillness, which can be so grounding when we're dealing with trauma.
Right? And she encourages physical activity to process trauma stored in the body. It's about using movement to help us release that energy and reconnect with our bodies.
So we've covered a lot of ground in terms of understanding and addressing the roots of self-sabotage. But what about moving forward? Because it's not just about healing the past, it's also about creating a new future. What does Wiest have to say about that?
Well, that's where things get really exciting. She emphasizes the importance of releasing the past and focusing on creating a new future. It's about shifting our energy from what was to what can be.
It's like closing one chapter and starting a fresh one with all the lessons we've learned along the way.
Exactly. And she introduces a powerful concept, connecting with our highest potential future self through visualization and journaling.
So it's not just about daydreaming, but about using these techniques to create a clear vision of who we want to become and the life we want to create.
Right. And it's not just about visualizing that future self. It's about embodying them. It's about asking ourselves, what would my highest potential future self do in this situation? And then taking action accordingly.
It's like we're inviting that wiser, more evolved version of ourselves to guide our decisions and actions.
Exactly. And she guides the listener through a process of envisioning their ideal future and working backward to identify steps they can take today to move towards that vision. It's like creating a roadmap for our future selves. We start with the destination and then map out the steps to get there.
It's like reverse engineering our dreams. I love that approach. But it's not just about setting goals, it's also about aligning our actions with our values.
Absolutely. She emphasizes the importance of adopting personal principles to guide our actions and create a foundation for success and fulfillment.
Because it's not just about achieving external success, it's about living with integrity and purpose. It's about making choices that feel good on a soul level.
And she gives examples of money principles like living beneath your means and saving for a rainy day.
It's about creating a solid financial foundation, not just chasing quick wins or instant gratification. And those principles can be applied to all areas of life, not just finances.
Right. And finally, she challenges the listener to find their true purpose. It's about exploring our values, passions, and skills to discover our unique contribution to the world.
Because when we're living in alignment with our purpose, our actions feel more meaningful and fulfilling.
It's like finding our North Star and letting it guide our decisions and actions. It gives us a sense of direction and clarity.
So we've explored a lot of insightful concepts and practical strategies from The Mountain Is You. And what's striking is how Wiest seamlessly weaves together the psychological, emotional, and even spiritual aspects of self-sabotage and self-mastery.
It's not just about fixing our flaws, but about embracing our wholeness and stepping into our full potential.
It's about recognizing that the mountain we're climbing is ultimately ourselves.
And that the journey of self-discovery is ongoing. So what resonates with you the most from everything we've discussed so far? What insights or strategies feel particularly relevant to your own life?
Okay, so we've talked about identifying those subconscious patterns and even understanding the needs they might be trying to meet. But how do we actually move from self-sabotage to what Wiest calls self-mastery? What does that shift actually look like?
You know, it's not about becoming some perfectly controlled, emotionless robot. In fact, Wiest really emphasizes that self-mastery isn't about suppressing your emotions at all.
Oh, that's good to hear, because I think a lot of us have been told to just, grin and bear it or touchen up when we have difficult feelings, but that never really works, does it? It's like trying to lift a beach ball underwater. It's going to pop back up eventually.
Exactly. Suppressing them just pushes those emotions down, but they don't disappear. Self-mastery is more about understanding your emotions and reacting to them in a way that helps you, not it hurts you. It's like you're becoming the captain of your own emotional ship. Navigating those rough waters with more awareness and skill.
I love that analogy. So how do we learn to become that captain, the master of our own feelings? It sounds kind of daunting.
Well, Wiest reminds us that our brains are naturally wired to resist what we truly want. We reach a goal, and then that feeling of accomplishment fades and we're off chasing the next thing. Think about it. Have you ever felt that in your own life that, okay, I did it, now what? Feeling.
Or all the time. It's that feeling of, is this all there is? We're always going after that next big thing, but it never really brings lasting happiness. And then we wonder why we feel stuck or unfulfilled.
And that's where White's idea of those microshifts is so important. It's not about huge overnight changes, but small, steady changes that build up over time. She says, small shifts in your thinking and small changes in your behavior will create a different future for you.
I love that quote. It's so powerful because it reminds us we don't have to do everything perfectly or make these drastic changes to see results. It's those little everyday choices that shape our lives in the end.
Yeah, it's like the difference between trying to climb a mountain all in one go versus taking a bunch of smaller, easier steps.
And it takes the pressure off, too, because sometimes those big changes can feel overwhelming, and that's when the self-sabotage sneaks back in.
Exactly. Weiss also has this cool idea that our minds are antifragile. It means that challenges and setbacks actually make us stronger, more resilient, and more creative.
Oh, yeah, it's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But how do we actually do that? Embrace those challenges instead of letting them defeat us.
It starts with changing how we see things. Instead of seeing setbacks as failures, we can see them as opportunities to learn and grow. Weiss suggests asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? How can I use this to become even stronger and more resilient?
So it's about shifting from a fixed mindset where we think our abilities are set in stone to a growth mindset where we believe we can learn and grow from our experiences.
Exactly. And it's about being kind to ourselves along the way. We're not going to get it right every time, and that's okay. Weiss says self-mastery is not the absence of falling down. It is the wisdom to get back up.
That's such a good point. It reminds us that self-mastery is a journey, not a destination. There are going to be bumps along the way.
And speaking of bumps, Weiss introduces this idea of adjustment shock. It's this idea that when we finally get something we've been working towards, it can actually make us anxious or even depressed.
Hold on, so you're saying that good things can actually trigger negative feelings? That doesn't seem to make sense.
I know, right? But it kind of makes sense when you think about it. We're going outside of our comfort zone, and that can feel unsettling, even if it's a positive change. It's like our system is trying to adjust to this new reality.
So we might finally get that dream job or reach a big financial goal and then feel overwhelmed or even empty afterward. And then that leads to self-sabotaging behaviors like second-guessing our choices or trying to go back to that old familiar discomfort.
Exactly. Weiss says that understanding this can help us go through those changes with more grace and self-awareness.
So it's about being ready for those bumps, knowing the part of growing, and having ways to deal with them. What else does Wyeth suggest for moving from self-sabotage to self-mastery?
She talks a lot about the importance of letting go of what she calls psychic thinking, which is basically making assumptions about what other people are thinking or what the future holds.
Oh, I think we're all guilty of that sometimes. We make up stories in our heads, usually out of fear or insecurity, and they can really get out of control. Like, everyone thinks I'm a failure, or I'm definitely going to mess this up.
Exactly. And those thoughts can really feed self-sabotaging behaviors because we start acting like those stories are true, even if there's no proof.
So how do we escape from those negative thought patterns? Sometimes they feel like they have a mind of their own.
Weiss says it's really important to question those thoughts. She suggests asking ourselves, is this thought really true? What evidence do I have to back it up? What's a more balanced or realistic way to look at this?
So it's about challenging those automatic negative thoughts and replacing them with more positive beliefs.
And it's about realizing we have the power to choose our thoughts. We're not controlled by our circumstances or past experiences. We can choose to focus on thoughts that help us, thoughts that support our growth and well-being.
That's a really empowering message, and it connects to what Weiss says about worrying. It's the weakest defense mechanism. It's not about ignoring our problems, but facing them head-on with a plan.
Exactly. Worrying keeps us stuck in a loop of fear and inaction. It's like we're spinning our wheels in the mud. Weiss says to shift from worrying to problem solving.
It's about taking action, not just stewing in anxiety. And that can be so free because when we feel like we're actually taking steps, even small ones, to deal with our problems, it gives us a feeling of control.
And talking about letting go, Wiest has some really helpful thoughts on releasing the past. She reminds us we can't force ourselves to let go. It's a process, and it often happens naturally as we build a new life that's so interesting and fulfilling that the past just fades away. It's like creating a new masterpiece on a fresh canvas, letting go of those old brush strokes and colors.
I love that analogy. It's so hopeful because it suggests that we don't have to be stuck in the past. We can create a new future, one brushstroke at a time.
Right. She also suggests a powerful technique for letting go of past trauma. Write a letter to your younger self, offering guidance and reassurance. It's like speaking to the part of you that's still carrying those wounds with compassion and understanding.
That's beautiful. And it's something we can all do on our own, in our own space.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly healing to offer that love and support to our younger selves.
And she emphasizes how important it is to restore that sense of safety, whether it's through strengthening our support system, improving our financial situation, or taking practical steps to address the root of the trauma.
It's about rebuilding that foundation of security and trust, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
And she encourages using meditation and physical activity as ways to process and release those trapped emotions and trauma.
It's about finding healthy ways to deal with that energy and connecting with our bodies in a way that feels grounding and empowering.
So we've talked about letting go of the past, but what about building a new future? Wiest introduces this idea of connecting with our highest potential future self, right?
Yes, it's like tapping into that wisest, most evolved version of yourself and letting them lead your choices and actions.
And how do we actually do that, connect with that future self? What's that process like?
Weiss suggests visualization, journaling, and what she calls reverse engineering our goals. We start with that ideal future self and then work backward, figuring out the steps we need to take to get there.
It's like making a roadmap for our dreams, a step-by-step guide to becoming the person we're meant to be.
Exactly. And she reminds us that setting personal principles is really important. These are the guiding values and beliefs that will help us make choices that are true to ourselves.
It's like creating a personal constitution, a set of rules for living with integrity and purpose.
And finally, she challenges us to find our true purpose, to figure out what our unique contribution to the world is.
Because when we're living in line with our purpose, everything else just falls into place. Our work feels meaningful, our relationships feel more fulfilling, and we have a sense of direction and purpose. It's like all the pieces of the puzzle finally fit together.
And if we think about the bigger picture, Wyeth mentions how nature needs imperfection for growth and renewal. So what things in your life, those imperfections or challenges, might actually be opportunities for transformation in disguise?
That's such a powerful question to consider. It reminds us that our imperfections aren't flaws, but chances to grow and evolve. And as we wrap up this deep dive into The Mountain Is You, I want to encourage everyone to keep exploring these ideas we've talked about. Apply them to your own life, embrace the journey of self-discovery, and remember that mountain. It's you. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Make sure to follow and subscribe.